To talk both about the state law and the city policy. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you, councilors. Good afternoon. My name is Heidi Brown. I'm Chief Deputy City Attorney, and I'm going to go over briefly our Oregon state law related to sanctuary, and then our city policy. And then there's a handful of different sanctuary laws, but these are the two that I think are relevant to our discussion today. And this is the other one, which is the prohibition for public bodies related to immigration enforcement. And so public entities such as the City of Portland cannot deny services, benefits, privileges, or opportunities based on somebody's immigration status. We also do not inquire into or collect information about a person's immigration status except in limited circumstances where it's required regarding a state or local law violation. And there may be some eligibility for a benefit a person is seeking. There are certain visas that people can obtain when they're working with law enforcement on something and they're an undocumented immigrant. And so they may seek that benefit and provide information related to that, or if it's submitted to a court, related to a court proceeding. And then just to be clear, public bodies can't provide information about a person in custody to a federal immigration authority for civil immigration enforcement purposes, again, unless it's required by a subpoena. Unless it's required by a subpoena, or it's information that's readily available to the public and it's already out there. So that's a very brief overview of state law. In 2017, after the first Trump administration, the city adopted its sanctuary policy. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So that was in a city resolution where the city acknowledged us as a welcoming city to all people. And I will note that the start of the resolution and the resolve that occurred in there talks about welcoming everybody, immigrants, but people-based, we welcome folks, national origin, race, color, gender, sexual identity. There's protected class statuses we recognize and welcome. And so under this, but in relation to our sanctuary city status, we had resolved to continue to prohibit in a manner consistent with state and federal law, which we are required to follow, this use of city funds, personnel, and equipment to enforce federal immigration law. So we prohibited that. And then council also directed the police bureau to ensure that their directive, which Chief Day will discuss, provides that PPB personnel do not cooperate with ICE except as expressly provided by federal law. That's, I think, really the summary of our sanctuary city policy.
And I know that this isn't your jurisdiction. I'm going to make a general comment, mostly directed at Mayor Wilson. But I think that there are valid concerns from the community about some of the mutual aid tents being removed in the vicinity. And I just wanted to state how I actually think it's quite dangerous. I understand the concern about encampments being set up around the ICE building and the potential escalations that could happen there. But the reality is that I saw, footage and photos of someone who had their eye shot with a rubber bullet and it was bleeding down their entire arm. And I don't actually know what happened to their eye or if they're okay. And so everyone who's protested before knows that we need medic tents and you need medics and you need people who are there who can help immediately, because if there's not people there to help you, sometimes things can go awry. So I have concerns about us using city resources to clear out medic tents and other mutual aid things that are there to really just keep protesters safe while they engage in their First Amendment rights.
It doesn't provide a caveat in the resolution for non-enforcement, non-immigration activity that ICE does. So I believe the resolution, as I read it, says we don't collaborate with ICE, not we don't collaborate with ICE when they're doing.
See. Okay, I see where you're going. Yeah.
So that's the gap that I wanted to mention, that first section. The second question I had, we know that one of the things that we have seen that I think is perhaps the exemplar of the type of criminal activity that you have mentioned and that PPB will intervene on at ICE is setting fires at the ICE building. And this is one of the many things, but one of the reasons I think that this comes up more is because fires spread, right? It's not going to be something that exclusively affects protesters or federal agents at that building, but it could affect someone who lives a block away in an apartment building. And So that makes sense to me, and I want to be clear before I ask this question that I'm not saying that PPB should not intervene on fires. Quite the opposite, if someone's doing that. But we've also seen that some of ICE's activities could affect nearby buildings, such as the use of chemical munitions, which can have serious negative effects on health, including reproductive health, to those who ingest it. Or just are, affected by it. And so given that we know that PPB is getting involved if a protester tries to start a fire, let's say, are there any situations, even hypothetical ones, in which PPB would be getting involved to prevent ICE doing anything?
Well, there would have to be, behavior that we openly recognize as unlawful, and I'll defer to the city attorney on that in terms of, what we would have to be able to have a legal basis for doing so. So that would be my standard.
No, that's correct. So if PPB were observing or there was evidence that federal law enforcement committed a crime, then just like anyone else, they would be subject to arrest based on that crime. But when they are enforcing their law, enforcing their federal civil immigration laws by detainers, the federal law allows them to do that. And even under our sanctuary state law and our sanctuary city policy, both of them reference that except as required otherwise by federal law in the state law, and then in our city policy, except as required by federal and state law, because we are required to comply with both of those laws. And under our sanctuary state law and our sanctuary city policy, both of them reference that except as required otherwise by federal law in the state law, and then in our city policy, except as required by federal and state law, because we are required to comply with both of those laws. The state with federal law, and then the city with state and federal law. So to the extent they're committing a crime, then yes, PPB could intervene and arrest somebody based on just like anybody else who commits a crime. As we know, there were a lot of laws that were passed during or after 2020 that really changed in a good way the landscape in Oregon, and a lot of changes in PPB policy that came. For example, PPB doesn't even, to my knowledge, doesn't even have any rubber bullet distraction devices. So as Councilor Maria was talking about earlier, somebody, was gotten hit in the head and blood seeping down their face from a rubber bullet. That's not something that PPB uses in a protest situation at all. And so I would just know there's different laws for the federal government than there are under state law and under city policy. Even identification, state law requires police officers to identify themselves as soon as they reasonably can. The federal law doesn't have the same requirements, so we have ICE agents going around and not necessarily identifying themselves, and we don't know necessarily who's taking that action, which puts Portland police in a very challenging situation.
Yeah, so I recognize you led off with a comment on the immigration enforcement, Heidi, and I want to talk about that in the context of the identification. That's really important, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the conversation in LA around requirements around identification and whether or not people are required to respect the authority of someone who hasn't proven that they are in fact law enforcement. Where I'm leaning, and I wanted to be clear about that.
And just to add one more thing, that there is a federal criminal law on interfering or hindering ICE immigration enforcement actions. So PPB has to walk the line of enforcing our laws, but also they are prohibited from interfering with or hindering ICE's immigration efforts. So just so people understand too the limits that all of us are under and facing potential federal criminal charges would be if we are interfering with or hindering ICE's efforts.
So that begs a question. Is response to protest part of their immigration work?
No, I mean, I think that response to crimes, and I think that's what the chief's talking about, if there's criminal action happening, by anyone, then that's what they would be able to come in and take a stance on. And I just wanted to make clear that there are when ICE is engaging in their civil enforcement action, PPB is limited on the way that they can step in. Now, they would not help enforce it. They won't help them perform that work either, and because that's prohibited by state law, it's prohibited by city policy, and prohibited by PPB policy.
These are questions that I've gotten, Chief Day, about the response to, and it relates to my last follow-up to Heidi as well, about the response to people who are attempting to, let's say, inhibit or slow down the work that ICE does in the immigration enforcement space. So their activity is in the protest space, but it's effectively a conflict or an attempt to slow or do that. So, and this is my categorization, but of questions I'm hearing. So when police are present at the facility on McAdam, what kind of resources are PPB using? I mean, is this the rapid response team? I'm guessing it's overtime. If so, I'm imagining there's supplies being used. Would it be fair to say some sort of cost is incurred by PPB in this scenario?
Yes.
Okay. I want to pretend for a moment that PPB was not present, and ICE was, and it might be FPS, and I appreciate that distinction, was reacting to protesters doing unlawful activity, let's say graffitiing the building.
That's a loser right there.
In that scenario, they'd probably have to go out and use some of their resources, time, money, overtime, et cetera, to intervene and possibly detain a protester. I think they've already been doing that, as you mentioned earlier. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so can we reasonably say, therefore, then PPB getting involved in responding to graffiti is taking on a cost that ICE would otherwise be taking on if PPB was not present?
I think there's a valid argument to be made there. And my position is that our responsibility to all of the population in the South Waterfront is to, serve and also to have a preventative effect on making sure that situations don't escalate. And the criminal activity that's happening down there, I believe Portland Police Bureau members are very well equipped and more moderate and well trained in their approach for intervening and taking action if need be. So we have seen over the course of the last several days a decrease of interaction by the Portland Police Bureau. Portland Police has not made an arrest in, I believe, the last 5 days. We're continue to monitor and be available, but we are looking at ways to decrease our footprint and allow for more of the other efforts being done on the part of FPS. And we have seen an increase in that behavior. Once again, I do not know what the charges are, but the scenario you used, whether it be criminal mischief or trespass or others, we have seen them come out and take action. So it would be. My preference that they be able to manage the building themselves and be able to handle that. I also would hope that they would be able to do that in a manner that doesn't escalate the situation. I think that with Portlanders, once again, the approach that we have taken, and we've demonstrated that with the arrests we've made, are more thoughtful, more well planned, and lesser use of force than what we're seeing from our federal partners. But ideally would be to have them provide the security for their building. That would be the preference. Yes.
Would it be possible for us to follow up and for you to let us know what it would take for us to help you get from here to there, to a place where they're providing the primary security on that facility?
Right, and I will say I'm having those conversations in real time. I had them on Sunday, and I'm pushing all of us to get to that direction, and hopeful that as a community, as a whole, we'll be able to do that, and the need for us will be seen less on our part I'm down there, the police bureau is down there intentionally because I feel like we have a role and responsibility to that particular part of the community as well as the city of Portland as a whole. But I understand also that that's taxing resources where other parts of the city are suffering. And so I am constantly evaluating that prioritization and looking aggressively even this week for ways to manage those resources. So yes, I'd be happy to share with you and keep you updated about how we get from here to there. That is the goal.
Yeah, and I think maybe an example might be helpful. There's a judo studio in St. John's that's had its windows smashed and had fecal matter spread on the windows several times. And this is maybe, it's a different precinct, I understand that. And it's St. John's, which we know gets less service by the city in a lot of ways. And so I think when I get constituent communications about police being willing to respond to ICE's windows, but not necessarily to a window in St. John's, there's a problem there. And I think that is not just an optical one, it is an optical one too. So I just wanted to kind of put that into relief through what I'm hearing.
They center around the fact that it's a highly volatile, contentious situation, has the risk, I believe, of causing greater harm to the city as a whole. So I don't see it as just the facility. I see it as my responsibility as the bureau director to think about public safety holistically. But I'm very empathetic and understanding that, ideally it would be if we could dedicate the resources to the coffee shop in St. John's or to the businesses that are often highlighted and suffering. And that's one of the concerns that I have, is because by prioritizing this work, we know that culture service will take longer to get to. We know that investigations will be put on hold. I'm very transparent about that, and it weighs on me as we try to find this balance. But know that the intentionality around it is less for me about the facility and more about the holistic approach for the city.
I'll come back to the questions with Robert. You gave some information on the permit, and I think there was an assessment, if I recall correctly, it was in 2011, around whether or not there was a safety risk posed by this facility. And obviously some of this facility's work is completely outside the context of all the things we're talking about in a protest sense. Its predecessor in Northwest Portland is where my parents went when they first came to the United States and Portland. So I'm very familiar with the sort of normal mundane work of appointments and things like that, and want to make sure those are protected too for those who are trying to make their appointments. But in the context of that safety assessment, at the time, and this is, I'm reading this in news reporting, so please correct me if that's not 100% accurate, that the evaluation led to an assessment that the risk of protests specifically and their effect on surrounding neighborhoods was not enough to warrant reconsideration of the permit at the time. Is that something, that assessment, is that within the scope of something that can be reevaluated at this time?
I think you have accurately described the finding at the time. I don't know that single finding could be re-examined. I think you would have to look at it through the lens of whether there's been a significant change in the use or an increase in the intensity of the activity. That is a question that we could look into further. This is probably not the appropriate venue to be providing legal advice on that topic.
Fair enough. I will ask this rhetorically and not to you then. I think I would love to know the degree to which ICE engaging in activity that leads to community response, that leads to the counter-protesting activity we see there from them, constitutes a change to what was anticipated at the time that permit was granted. And that's not to say that I'm leaning towards whatever. I think it's fair to say we should have the authority to do so, and we should be evaluating this from the perspective of, is it a good idea or not? That's where I'm leaning at this moment, but I don't know if that's true. So that's the rhetorical question.
And I don't know that what you're saying is true either. So just to set the expectation for people in the audience that are listening.
Yes.
It's important not to speculate, and I'd be happy to give the advice at the appropriate time.
That's fair. I appreciate that clarification.
Council Maria?
Yeah, I appreciate those clarifications as well. Thank you. I think we should get legal advice privately, so I appreciate you, Robert. It's my understanding also that, for one thing, I appreciate not wanting to put city funding or resources towards enforcing protests outside of ICE, and I have concerns that, frankly, the federal government will act in more unethical ways towards protesters than local police who have some involvement. And I say that as someone who has also been beaten with batons by our local police. So the other concern that I have is that the federal government has made it clear that if local laws don't appear to be enforced, that they will happily send the National Guard or other escalations of the federal government in to repress protests. So I just want to say that to our audience members, that there is a very delicate tightrope that we are walking, and I want to make sure that when we're having these discussions that we are talking about the very real consequences of every single decision that is being made at this time.
For me, I think I'll just daylight perhaps some of the values that I bring to this conversation. And, protecting the First Amendment is where I'm always going to start. I want everyone to know here you have the right to assemble and to make your voice heard, and I'll do everything in my power to protect your right to do that and to honor the labor that you put in to try and protect your neighbors. Ensuring that we're in compliance with our sanctuary city laws and policies, which, I think is about also addressing that perception gap where sometimes the requirements are actually being complied with, but the requirements and the expectations we've created through resolutions don't necessarily align. And I know that that's something that we have commitment across the administration from as well. And finally, and this is also something that you mentioned, Councilor Murillo, being strategic and trying to deliver for the people. I think in our roles, there are things that we could do that might be things that are requested, and it wouldn't be performative if anyone else did it, but in our roles it might be. And so I want to be clear that the goal here for me is to deliver an actual change of policy, and I think the degree to which we can do that is obviously limited by being city officials and not federal ones. But I do think that those are sort of 5 ideas that I bring to this. I intend to continue this conversation and just remind everyone, sometimes you don't see us talking about it, doesn't mean we're not working on it. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Are not immune from law enforcement. So I think that's important for people to hear. Be interesting to see if we see examples in other cities around the country where ICE agents are breaking the law and have been held accountable. Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and thanks very much to the audience, which was largely silent in its commentary. Really appreciate that. Appreciate the jazz hands and the blues hands. I want to acknowledge. Can you please be quiet? We're about to close.
80% of the people who leave that facility still do not have a lawyer. So this whole we can't do anything because it's not a perfect solution is.
Can you please be quiet?
I have been quiet enough in my life, sir. I will not.
I want
Thank you very much for that. But you guys are talking a lot of things of how you're just going to go around.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask to have you removed if you don't quiet.
That's fine. You can have me removed. I'll go.
Okay.
I'm going to stay here and be disruptive because that is the job, sir.
Okay, can I ask security to ask whoever's speaking to be
They're
removed?
shooting people in the head, and you're worried about the
They are
floor?
absolutely.
They're shooting people.
Okay, are we gonna have to are we gonna have to clear the room?
They are absolutely hurting protesters at the damn point.
I have seen
That
many
is what they
protesters.
are seeking to do. They have shot me. I've seen them shoot kids. I've seen them shoot people in the eye.
They shot me in the back of the head. I'm dressed.
That's because the freaking community is with us. Revoke the permit or face recall. All of you.
Steve, close us out.
And with that, our next committee meeting is on July 8th, and I bring this meeting of the Community and Public Safety Committee to a close.
Fuck around, find out, just you, no sound, no lights, no crowd, heartbeat so loud.